Welcome back to the Rob Kall Bottom Up Radio Show. My guest now is Jesselyn Radack of the Government Accountability Project. That's www.whistleblower.org. Welcome back to the show, Jesselyn.
Thank you for having me.
And currently, your article is top headlined on opednews.com. You want to tell us a little bit about what that article is about?
I wish it was about something more upbeat, but it's about the charges that have been brought against the alleged source of the WikiLeaks video called Collateral Murder, which is a video of an American helicopter gunning down a dozen or so unarmed Iraqi civilians, including 2 reporters and a number of children, while hooting in the background as if it were a video game.
And what's the article about?
My article is about the increasingly troubling criminalization of whistleblowing, and the fact that even the Washington Post, which has not exactly been pro-whistleblower, gets that the U.S. has been taking a tough line on, quote, leaks, which is a pejorative term for whistleblowers. And it doesn't matter to me, whether it was Bush, or whether it's Obama at the helm, but the biggest crimes of our generation, my generation, torture and warrantless wiretapping and extraordinary rendition, would not have come to light but for the unauthorized disclosure of classified information. And it was no surprise that Bradley Manning was likely going to be charged, but the severity of the charges and the content is disturbing, and this is also part of a toxic trend of subjecting people like National Security Agency former official Thomas Drake and others to criminal charges for speaking truth to power.
What about the severity of charges? What do you mean by that?
Thomas Drake is facing, I believe, 35 years. He's been indicted under a 1917 law called the Espionage Act, which is meant to prosecute spies, not whistleblowers. And Manning is facing substantial time in a military brig for disclosing a video that I don't think anyone has made the argument has caused any harm to national security, and the same would apply to Thomas Drake's disclosure.
What did Drake disclose?
Drake disclosed, well, actually, he's not charged with disclosing anything. That the government weaves this very sordid tale of him secretly disclosing classified information to the Baltimore Sun, but he's actually charged with retention of classified information with the purpose of distribution. But this all stems from the government's embarrassment over a series of Baltimore Sun articles, and one in particular that talked about a $1 billion boondoggle in which the National Security Agency chose a $1 billion failed invasive surveillance program called Trailblazer over one that could more adequately collect intelligence information without violating people's privacy.
So this is kind of vindictive stuff that the government is engaging in.
It's pure retaliation. Clearly, what Drake and what Manning are alleged to have disclosed were in the public interest. Clearly, the content of these supposed disclosures did no harm to national security and did nothing to benefit a foreign nation. So to me, it looks like actually the worst kind of retaliation, short of killing somebody. I think of Karen Silkwood, and more recently the fact that the Pentagon has launched a worldwide manhunt for the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange. But this incarcerating someone for the rest of their natural life is pretty much the worst form of retaliation I've seen, and it's occurring with startling and disturbing frequency in the Obama administration.
Would you say that Obama is worse than Bush?
Yes. Bush harassed whistleblowers unmercifully. I myself, as a whistleblower, was also criminally investigated under federal criminal investigation for supposedly leaking and referred to the state bars in which I'm licensed and put on the no-fly list. All of this inconvenient and expensive, but I never faced going to jail. I never had charges actually be brought against me. So it is quite disturbing to me that on Obama's watch, in an administration that's committed to openness and transparency, that Thomas Drake has been indicted, and Shemai Leibowitz, who was an FBI translator who supposedly leaked stuff, was sentenced to 20 months, and that New York Times reporter James Risen, who had broken the warrantless wiretapping story, there was a grand jury subpoena issued in the Bush era that was reissued recently by Obama. And then now we have Bradley Manning, who has a charge sheet that's quite lengthy and at the same time quite telling.
So basically what you're saying is under Bush, they harassed whistleblowers. Under Obama, they viciously go after them and prosecute and jail them.
Yes, with Obama, they are using the criminal justice system to go after whistleblowers. And even in today's articles about the muting charge, they said they wanted to send a message. And sending a message is a political goal. It has nothing to do with justice, because the disclosures that were made in both the Drake case and in the Manning case disclosed information that was overwhelmingly in the public interest. I know the government has woven a very sordid narrative of what Manning did and of what Drake did, but if you look at what they are actually charged with, it doesn't comport with this oh-so-awful narrative tale that's being spun by the government about them. Just by way of example, the government's been saying over and over again that Manning has taken 250,000 classified diplomatic cables and provided them to WikiLeaks. Well, all we have is the government's word on that, and it's not even in the government's own charge sheet.
What do you mean it's not in their charge sheet?
That particular allegation is of 250,000 classified diplomatic cables. He's not charged with that.
So this is just a press release or something?
Well, granted, they're going to prosecute him within a military forum, but all we know so far factually is that he disclosed a collateral murder video, and it stuns me that the government has been able to kind of do a bait and switch that has shifted the conversation from a discussion of the massacre shown on the collateral murder video, in which, like you said, U.S. soldiers are massacring and gunning down unarmed Iraqi civilians, including children. It's a horrific video. But instead, the government has us talking about whether or not Manning is some kind of traitor and when and how high to hang him, and what potential national security damage he's done when WikiLeaks hasn't published any classified diplomatic cables, and we have no evidence whatsoever that he turned anything of that manner over. In fact, all we have on the video is the statements of Adrian Lamo, a convicted hacker who has his own cooperation agreement with the government.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I haven't blogged about that extensively. It's a sort of just a collateral issue and one of the many wrinkles.
Yeah, but it's typical of the government to use a potential perpetrator to prosecute somebody who is possibly much less guilty.
Sure, the government flips people all the time, though the media coverage, while some of the media has mentioned that Adrian Lamo had been a computer hacker, it's like now he's suddenly found conscience, and because of his duty to country felt like he had to turn Manning in. Really? Query whether Adrian Lamo has watched that video, because to me, anyone who's found a conscience will understand the public value of that video.
Absolutely. Well, my theory is that whistleblowers are heroes. Now, one issue that you raised in this article is that there's a nail in the coffin.
I feel like upping the ante to actually criminally prosecuting people, and we have a 1, 2, 3, 4 with the indictment of Thomas Drake and the reissuing of a Bush-era grand jury subpoena against New York Times reporter Jim Risen to go after his sources, and the sentencing of Shimei Leibowitz, an FBI linguist who was also accused of leaking.
How do you spell that
name? The criminal charges brought against Manning. I feel like that is a loud and clear and chilling message to anyone who is even remotely thinking about blowing the whistle.
What can people do?
What people can do right now is get on the phone and call the White House. First of all, they can go to Save Tom Drake. It's a Facebook page somebody set up, and, quote, like the page and make a comment if they want to show their support. There's a Help Bradley Manning page. And they can write to the president who campaigned on the scandals that whistleblowers exposed, such as torture and warrantless wiretapping, who campaigned on openness and transparency, and tell him this is absolutely unacceptable and offensive and atrocious. And to the extent that he's trying to curry favor with intelligence groups, if that's his motivation, it doesn't matter. That's a political goal. Again, that has nothing to do with justice, and these cases should not be tried in the criminal justice system. I think loud and clear in the public forum, both Manning and especially Drake has overwhelming support of the public for what they disclosed. The White House phone should be ringing off the hook. And then, if people want to go the extra mile, they can call the Senate Judiciary Committee, which has oversight over the Justice Department, and ask what is going on and to hold the Justice Department accountable.
Well, the Justice Department has always been an enemy of whistleblowers, I believe.
Yes, but this is a president who campaigned on the importance of whistleblowers and why whistleblowers are so integral to the process, and he pledged to support whistleblowers. And I don't think, a lot of people make campaign promises. I worked to elect Obama. I contributed to his campaign. I worked hard for his campaign. And, as someone who revealed information that I think he relied on and was helpful to his campaign, as did people who revealed Abu Ghraib and misconduct by the National Security Administration. This is a huge betrayal and a huge slap in the face. I mean, I guess he sees whistleblowers as a throwaway constituency, but I doubt he'll have their support the next time around. It's completely hypocritical and offensive to justice, and is completely at odds with his own campaign promises.
I think you can say the same about progressives, too, in general.
Yes, in general, being treated, the people who worked hard, don't forget the person who brought you to the prom. And on civil liberties issues, I think Obama's record has been atrocious. I'm deeply disappointed, and I never thought I would be saying that about Obama. People are like, "Oh, you're anti-Obama." No, I worked for Obama. I contributed. I helped to get him elected. I served as an election judge. I did everything I could to get Obama in office. But let me remind you of what Obama said. This is after he was elected. This is part of, once he was in the transition phase, he said that often the best source of information about waste, fraud, and abuse in government is an existing government employee committed to public integrity and willing to speak out. Such acts of courage and patriotism, which can sometimes save lives and often save taxpayer dollars, should be encouraged rather than stifled. We need to empower federal employees as watchdogs of wrongdoing and partners in performance.
Hypocrisy unlimited.
Yes. And, again, it's short of killing somebody, imprisoning them for the rest of their natural life, certainly ranks up there as a punishment. And this is just vengeful retaliation taken to a whole new level. The other thing people can do is put pressure on their members of Congress to enact the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, which would include national security and intelligence whistleblowers like Bradley Manning and Thomas Drake, who right now don't even have the very weak protection of the Whistleblower Protection Act.
Whose bills is this in the House or Senate?
Both have versions of the bill. Right now it is stalled in the Senate due to secret hold.
Who's the sponsor of the bill?
I'm not sure off
Grassley?
the top of my head. I don't do the legislative stuff on my end. Tom Devine does, but on the Government Accountability Project webpage, you can find an update on the legislative progress of that bill. But if anything speaks to the fact that whistleblowers need better protection, it's examples like this. Because in theory, the government's not allowed to retaliate against an employee who reasonably believes that they are disclosing evidence of fraud, waste, abuse, or illegality. But then when the government retaliates against you in spades, there's no individual cause of action created by the protection laws. And then people like Manning and Drake are completely outside the ambit of the already weak whistleblower protection that does exist.
This is something that really ought to be passed, and I know it's been around for a long time, the effort to get something like this passed, and it's just not happening.
Yes, and we were hoping, it's been around going on, I believe this is about 9 years old at this point, this effort to reform the Whistleblower Protection Act, which has been bastardized by the Federal Circuit Court, which has monopoly jurisdiction over all whistleblower appeals. So the effort has been long underway, and we finally have some movement, and it seems to me the big stumbling block with the White House right now is protection of national security and intelligence whistleblowers and having them be included within the ambit of protection. That is especially curious to me because it seems that national security whistleblowers are some of the people you would most want to hear from if your airplane that you're flying in has not been fixed, or if the food you're eating is tainted. It's people who are doing national security work who are going to be privy to some of the worst abuses.
Unless, as a legislator or a president, your loyalty is more to corporations than people.
Right, and clearly, like in the case of the financial whistleblower, Bradley Birkenfeld, another whistleblower who was sentenced to jail and is currently serving 3 years and 4 months in Schuylkill, Pennsylvania. He blew the whistle on UBS, Switzerland's largest bank and Obama's biggest bundler of funds, and a bank which has contributed to the campaigns of more than 30% of Congress.
And what was he charged with?
Where congressional and executive and legislative priorities lie in that case, because right now the whistleblower is the only one in that entire scandal who has gone to jail, and the 20,000 tax cheats, and some of the wealthiest Americans are the biggest tax dodgers. They've paid fines, they've gotten a slap on the wrist, some of them maybe have gotten a little probation. No one else is sitting in jail right now.
What was he charged with?
He was charged with one count of aiding and abetting fraud. He pled guilty to a single count. And he, obviously, if you're a whistleblower and you're coming from the inside, there's quite a large chance that at some point, knowing or unknowing, you partook in the misconduct on which you're blowing the whistle. That you discovered it, you realized there was a problem going on, that you are part of that problem, and you're blowing the whistle on it. Bradley Manning said that he felt like he was watching things that were illegal. Thomas Drake, clearly, we know that the whole warrantless wiretapping scandal was illegal. The Congress, in fact, authorized by law retroactive immunity from criminal prosecution for all the wrongdoers. Yet this administration, which insists, we're only going to look forward, not backwards, except when it comes to whistleblowers. That, again, that should be giving people great pause, but also giving great outrage and creating great outrage. It's absurd.
Well, we're finding more and more that we didn't get what we voted for.
No, definitely when it comes to civil liberties, absolutely not, because state secrets, classification, those were abused during the Bush administration, and those were the buzzwords that floated around information precisely like what Manning is alleged to have revealed and what Drake is alleged to have made public. And, as I always say, you can't classify illegal conduct. You can attach that label to it, but that is not proper classification. That is just a symptom of the overclassification and retroactive classification that the Bush administration expanded to hide their crimes. You can't go kill someone and then claim it's classified. Well, supposedly you can't, but I guess now, under the Manning case, you can.
This is the Rob Kall Bottom Up Radio Show, WNJC 1360. I'm talking with Jesselyn Radack, a whistleblower, about whistleblowers and how they are being brutally attacked by Obama, far worse than the Bush administration. Jesselyn, you posted your article also on Daily Kos. What kind of response are you getting there?
Right now, it's number one on the recommended list on Daily Kos, and has been on the recommended list all day, and that is not something I take for granted. I'm grateful to Op-Ed News and for fellow Cossacks at Daily Kos for reading and for recommending my blog. But again, I urge people who are listening to your show and people who are reading on Op-Ed News or on Daily Kos to actually take the next step, pick up the phone, make a phone call, go to Facebook, go to the Save Tom Drake page and hit like. That will take literally about 10 seconds, and keep yelling. I think people have kind of, Obama's better than Bush, and therefore we can't really do anything. That's not true at all, and people should be up in arms about this, because when you sit by and you keep watching it happen, it's going to keep happening. And look at the stuff that's being criminally penalized right now. I mean, for God's sake, Tom Drake, who is a patriot, who has spent his entire life in government service in both the military and in the private sector, most of his working life in service of this country, has been charged under the Espionage Act, a 93-year-old law that has been used a total of 4 times to go after so-called leakers. The first one was Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers whistleblower. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of what we're talking about here.
So they basically, so cowardly, corrupt, dirty government uses a law to identify heroes, basically.
Right, and in fact, turns those patriotic people, basically accuses them of being traitors and turncoats and somehow helping the enemy. In both Manning's case and the Drake case, 2 people who were trying to serve their country and I think demonstrate heroic patriotism, and accusing them of harming the United States. Though when you actually read the charges and actually look at what they're charged with, Drake is charged with unlawful retention of classified information, which I submit every government employee who has ever worked from home, any employee from the FBI, CIA, NSA who has ever worked from home, is guilty of the same thing. I know when I worked at the Justice Department, people took home classified and attorney-client matters to work on from home all the time, especially during the government furloughs.
So you mentioned that there are 4 people who have been charged using the Espionage Act.
Yes. Daniel Ellsberg was the first. As you know, he was a Pentagon Papers whistleblower, and that case was eventually dropped in light of extreme government misconduct that ultimately resulted in the resignation of President Richard Nixon. The second person was around 1985, a man named Samuel Morrison, who allegedly gave a picture of a satellite to Jane's Defense Weekly. He was later pardoned by President Bill Clinton. The third was the AIPAC case, American Israel. I'm not going to remember the full acronym here, but that case was aborted. And now Drake has the dubious distinction of being the 4th person to be charged not for spying, but for basically, quote-unquote, leaking. But even when you read the indictment, when they get down to the actual charging of him, it's not for unauthorized disclosure of classified information. That appears nowhere in the indictment other than in the wild narrative that they spend many pages spinning.
We've got to do something about this because, the whole time of the Bush administration, I kept thinking that whistleblowers would come out and blow away the Bush administration, and it ended up the Justice Department squelched it. And now we've got two of the 3 parts of government going after it, and a failure of the Congress to do anything about it. Thank you,
right,
Jesselyn.
All that's left basically is the judicial branch, and even with regard to the warrantless wiretapping issue, which looked at in the macrocosm underpins the Thomas Drake case. In fact, they began investigating him and a number of other NSA employees after the famous New York Times story broke the scandal. That's when they initially began investigating Thomas Drake. That now has been, basically, those lawsuits have been completely
Jesselyn, we've got to just do a station ID.
Based on state secrets.
This is the Rob Kall Bottom Up Radio Show, WNJC 1360 AM, Washington Township. Been talking with Jesselyn Radack. To hear the rest of this conversation, go to opednews.com/podcasts. And you'll find us there or on iTunes looking for Rob Kall. So, Jesselyn.
Yes.
Where do you see Manning and Drake heading? What you mentioned that Clinton pardoned Morrison. Of course, that was probably 5-10 years later. This guy did time, huh?
He did. I would hope that with enough public outcry, they would dismiss the indictment against Drake, and that it would not go to trial. And then if it did go to trial, that he would be acquitted. With Manning is charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so he's in a different forum, a military forum. So he will be court-martialed, and that's a whole different animal that I am not expert in. But we obviously have seen some of the flaws in that system in recent years. I'm hoping that both men will be exonerated when the government is actually put to its proof of the case, of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that these men did what they're accused of doing. And in Drake's case in particular, under the Espionage Act, he would have had to intend to harm the United States or to benefit a foreign nation, neither of which any person can make a straight-faced, principled argument was his motivation. Same with Manning. I don't know what the different actual intent requirements are for his various charges, because he has 2 charges against him, but the first encompasses 4 counts of violating Army regulations by transferring classified information to a personal computer, and the second has 8 counts of violating federal laws governing handling of classified information. And I have not studied the details of the proof to which the government will be put in prosecuting his case. But with Drake's case, he has spent so much money defending himself since the New York Times story broke, and for which he was absolutely not a source for that story. But his lives and that of countless others, more than 10, have been, if not ruined, severely hampered by being the target of a federal criminal investigation. I believe the New York Times exposed that they had assigned some 5 prosecutors and 15 investigators to go after the people who, quote-unquote, leaked the story of that illegal program that clearly violated the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. So Drake exhausted all his resources in defending himself over the last 5 years, and so now is being defended by a public defender. That's what it's come down to. This
country is in a scary place, and now then we just have the news that the Coast Guard, and you have to attribute that to Obama, has banned journalists from being within 65 feet of Gulf oil spill related materials like oil-covered animals. Mm-hmm. And they've made it a felony if a journalist goes closer.
Yes, and that actually is reminiscent of another whistleblower, Gina Gray, who had blown the whistle on journalists and photographers being banned from taking photographs at Arlington National Cemetery, even though the families of the deceased wanted it to be photographed, wanted their burials to be photographed. And now, years after she was first ousted from her job, we find out that her whistleblowing was even deeper than what the public knew. It had to do with the dumping graves in the river and misplacing people's ashes and mishandling people's remains. So often, I would submit to you, whatever you're hearing publicly that people are blowing the whistle on, it's usually far worse. There's usually more to the story because they are actually respecting classification rules, they are not sharing. Thomas Drake has shared information internally while at the NSA and with the heads of the House and Senate intelligence committees that he has not shared publicly, which is actually an argument in his favor that he's respecting classified information. But I agree with you. You know, when you're trying to ban journalists from covering things, you are essentially covering up. And you know, unfortunately, during the Bush administration, journalists were more of the government's, not the government watchdog, but the government lapdog. You know, and at least now we have journalists trying to do their jobs, but then you get government bans on journalists, and it is very reminiscent of Bush pulling people's press passes when they ran afoul, having fake journalists in briefings, and a number of other misconduct.
Well, that we're seeing that with BP into embedding publicists doubling as journalists reporting on the things with the Coast Guard.
Yes, and I would submit to you that BP is precisely the kind of case that I think all Americans wish there would have been a whistleblower ahead of time before this calamity occurred.
Well, I think what your message really is saying in your article is that what Obama and his government is doing is preventing and intimidating and scaring whistleblowers who could save lives, who could save species, who could save billions of dollars from doing what they would normally want to do, which is expose corruption and things that are wrong. And now we have a government of vindictive revenge and retribution instead. Nice job, Obama.
Yeah, I think he needs to start walking the walk, because he certainly talked the talk. And I and millions of others believed him, worked for him, worked to get him elected, contributed to his campaign, worked to ensure a fair election, and are being tossed aside.
Here we are.
He's
you know,
doing the exact opposite.
You know, Jesselyn, I've been wondering lately, because it seems to me that Obama is a wonk. I'm wondering who in his White House is a moral compass, if anyone.
Who's a moral compass? I don't know. Who's not? Rahm Emanuel. Michelle? I don't know. I don't know who is his moral compass. I thought, based on his campaign rhetoric, Fave, the guy who writes his speech, maybe the one who wrote his campaign speeches at one point, was a moral compass. But in terms of his inner circle, no one that I can think of except perhaps Norm Eisen, who, at least with negotiations with the whistleblower community, talks a good game. Yet, when confronted about the criminalization of whistleblowers and how problematic, he's kind of like, oh, well, I have nothing to do with the criminal part. I don't know anything about that. I don't know how you can be a breathing, waking human being and not see this on the front page of the Washington Post and New York Times. But I think, at least Norm Eisen, who is the ethics attorney for the White House, has been working on, with whistleblower reform groups on trying to move the legislation forward, but that seems to be at odds with what his boss is doing and what the head of the Justice Department is doing.
I keep coming back in my head to the fact that somebody's put a block on the legislation in the Senate. I got to wonder who would do something like that.
Yeah, well, I think it's very telling that they do that in secret. The hold on the legislation is a secret hold. And when people are doing things in secret, when they're committing crimes or engaging in fraud, waste, and abuse, and then cloaking that under a label of classification, this is all of the same cloth, this kind of behavior. And to the extent that the government there's no proper classification of things that the government finds embarrassing, that's not a reason to classify it because it's embarrassing to the government, or it makes our government look bad, or it alerts people to the real-life bloodshed and carnage of the war that we're in. That's not a valid reason under classification regulations to give something that label, which of course ballooned under the Bush administration to include 160-something hybrid secrecy categories like sensitive security information and top secret and super, super secret and secret but unclassified.
I guess we'll see the Obama administration expanding on that, as they seem to have the propensity to do.
Yeah, I think the Obama administration clearly the Constitution Project had submitted a number of transition memos on these issues, and one dealt specifically with the over-classification and retroactive classification and expanding classification under Bush, and urged Obama to be more open. And of course he campaigned on openness and transparency.
And change.
And change, yes. But, even Defense Secretary Robert Gates said that leaks, so-called leaks, would not be tolerated and would be prosecuted, which can carry just a huge cost in terms of the public interest. Because I think it would be hard to find someone who wouldn't have been happy to have a BP whistleblower or a Deep Horizon whistleblower. When it hits close to home, people feel it more. But until people in our community start, facing criminal prosecution, it's still not hitting home for a lot of people. A lot of people are like, "Hey, it's better than Bush," and to me, that's really setting a low bar.
And I'm not even sure anymore if it is better than Bush.
Well, certainly in this case of how whistleblowers are being treated, as a whistleblower myself, who was, like I said, under criminal investigation during the Bush years, it's worse. I never got indicted. They never brought charges against me. The case closed with no charges ever being brought. And while I racked up a huge amount of debt and faced a lot of harassment and torment, both personally and professionally, at the government's hands, at least I didn't have to face criminal charges.
Jesselyn, thank you so much. Good to have you back on the show. Keep up your work.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye.
Bye-bye.